Chapter 7, the finances of housing. So now we're going to go into the advantages of renting, the disadvantages of renting, your options for housing, buying a house, should you, shouldn't you. And later on in this chapter, we'll be covering the how to buy and sell a home. So we're going to do sections 1 and 2. Section 1 is very short. Section 1 just talks about our housing options and choosing which housing that you want, whether you want to rent or to own. Your choice of housing will depend on your lifestyle. And your lifestyle is a way in which you choose to spend your time and your money. And your lifestyle with your housing will determine, one, how close to work do you want to live? Okay, do you like to drive? Do you not like to drive? If you don't have a car, you're going to have to live closer to the train or closer to maybe the bus stop. Second, you have to look at how long you plan to stay in one place. If you plan on staying there for a while, a house may be a better option. If you're not too sure, or you may plan on moving, or you may be relocated because of your job, you may want to look at an apartment. And thirdly, your lifestyle will determine how much privacy would you like to have. Is privacy an important part, an important aspect of living to you? Then a house is definitely more your option as compared to an apartment. So kind of your lifestyle determine what housing do you want, and there's trade-offs, our opportunity cost. And you need to consider these trade-offs, the time, the effort, and the money with housing. So for example, if you want a fixer-upper, if you don't want to spend a lot of money on a house, okay, but you're going to have to spend the time and the effort on putting in new floors and putting in new siding, and it's a lot of work if you wanted to be a nicer house. For another example is, if you value mobility, and that's the ability to move easily from one place to another, you're going to have to look at renting. Because as we said with housing, it's liquidity and trying to sell a house quickly, it's usually hard. It's usually not as quick as you can just get up and usually just leave with an apartment. And another trade-off, you need to consider tax advantages. With home ownership, there are tax benefits. If you're a renter, you don't receive any of those tax advantages. So trade-offs that you need to consider whether you look at an apartment or a house. Right into 7.2, we're talking about renting. Okay, renting a residence. Maybe a lot of you rent an apartment. Maybe you're in a complex near Woodbridge. Maybe you rent in a home. With renting, there is either a tenant or a landlord. A tenant is the person who pays for the right to live in a residence owned by someone else. So if you live in an apartment, you are a tenant, and you abide by your landlord's rules. And the landlord is the person who owns the property that you're renting. And there's different types of rentals. Of course, you have your apartment. There's garden apartments, which have possibly a patio and some lawn. There's a apartment complex, which has on-site conveniences such as a pool, maybe a tennis court, maybe laundry services. You can also rent a house, a 1 or 2 family house. You can rent part of that house. You can also rent either a townhouse, or you can rent a room within a house. You may live in a house that has all different rooms, but these usually come with a higher cost. So your different options of renting. With renting, when you want to rent an apartment and you just want to rent and not buy, with housing, you need to consider the size. Okay, how big, how small. The location, is it close to your school? Is it close to work? Because the cost of gas to drive to where you need to drive. You also need to consider the finances. How much is it rent per month? All right, you also have to look at the security deposit, and that's what you kind of like a down payment. You may have the money for the monthly rent, but you might not have the money for the security deposit. You also look at utilities. Are they included? Are they not? You also want to look at the length of the lease. Is it a 1-year lease? So if you don't like it, you can move after a year. Is it possibly longer than that? So things you have to consider. You also have to consider the building condition. Is it newer? Is it older? Is there parking? Okay. Is there parking, I should say, I'm sorry, on the side? Does it have their own parking lot? So you need to consider the building, and you also need to consider the layout and facilities. Does it have AC? Does it have heat? Are there doors where doors are supposed to be? Are there locks? How are the condition of the windows? So small things, if you live in a house, you may take for granted, all things that you need to consider, because they may or may not be there, and within your lease, the landlord may or may not fix it. And are you okay with that? So the five major points with renting that you have to consider: size, location, finances, the building, and the layout and facilities. And this chart goes more specific. Other than the examples I provided you, this is a good chart to look and to see the different examples when we say location, finances, building, and layout. And we'll go a little bit more detail on this chart in class. The advantages of renting: mobility. Okay, you only have to give a month or 2 months notice that you want to leave, and you can easily leave if you would like to move. So with renting, you can get up and move fairly easily. There are fewer responsibilities. The major repairs are your landlord's responsibility. A plumbing issue, AC issue, that's all your landlord's responsibilities. But it depends on your landlord's work ethic. He may be slow to come fix it. He may be quick, so you need to consider the type of person your landlord is. Right? But all the responsibilities, the shoveling, that is all your landlord's responsibilities. And lastly, low initial costs. The security deposit that you pay is usually just a month or 2 months rent. Okay? And there is no down payment with an apartment. Whereas with a house, you may buy a $300,000, $400,000 house, but there may be a 20 or 25% down payment. With apartments, there's no down payment. There's just a security deposit. So it's a lot cheaper, the security deposit, than the house. The disadvantages: okay, financial restrictions. There's no equity. You're not obtaining an asset. It's not like you're buying a house and you're obtaining the asset of the house. All right. You also don't receive tax benefits because you're not a homeowner. You have lifestyle restrictions. So in your lease, your landlord may say there's no pets, no dogs. There's also limitations on what you can do inside. You can't just go ahead and paint the walls a different color because you don't like the walls. You can't go ahead and change the carpet to wood floors because it's not yours. There are also legal matters. You sign a lease when you rent, and a lease is a document that defines the conditions of the rental agreement between yourself, you're the tenant, and the landlord. All right, you need to go through that lease very carefully. If there's something that you don't understand, speak it out with your landlord. If there's an issue that you like to have changed in the lease, you need to figure that out and discuss before you sign it. Okay, because you are binded by that lease. And the biggest thing is privacy. You really have no privacy in an apartment because you have people living on top of you, right next to you. So it's harder as compared to living in a house where you have your own space that you own. The cost of renting. The price that you'll pay per month of your rental will be determined by the location. If, say, more north, especially in New Jersey, closer and closer you get to New York City and major cities, the more you're going to be paying in rent. All right. Living space. If you're looking at a 2-bedroom apartment, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, the more bedrooms you include, the price is going to increase. The utilities will affect the cost of renting. Are they included in your rent or are they not? And are they separate? Or is the landlord going to cover some of them? So that will influence the cost that you'll pay per month. The security deposit, I've been mentioning that. That is the amount of money paid to the owner to guard against any financial loss or damage. You get that security deposit back, but whenever you decide to leave, but the landlord subtracts any damages from that security deposit. It's usually a month to 2 months rent. That is your security deposit. So that's a cost that you need to consider. And lastly, renters insurance, which is insurance that it covers your personal property as a result of damage or death. You don't need it, okay? But if anything were to happen, you can't go and recover it. So kind of the basics of renting. We'll go into how